Tuesday, November 9th, 2021, 6:45 a.m., Green Guesthouse, Mae Sot, Thailand. My day yesterday kind of spun out of control, and because of that, I don't think I will be on the road to Sukhothai this morning. I could still leave today, but I'm just way too tired, and my brain is too scattered. I think I need today to settle down and relax and do some other stuff. And then I would be in a much better frame of mind for Sukhothai. With these delays, I'll end up with less and less time to spend in Sukhothai, but it's still a possibility. Tomorrow is the 10th, and if I leave tomorrow morning, I can still have as many as 4 days in Sukhothai, and that includes a stopover in Tak City in both directions. If I drive straight through, I could stay in Sukhothai even longer, and that's fine. So I am going to lean into today as another day of work and organizing. I had a bunch of tasks and errands yesterday. I needed to get money for my Sukhothai trip, and the ATM showed me some love and gave me some cash. That was nice. It was still pouring rain at that time, but I went out into the city with an umbrella and stayed relatively dry. I also got a haircut at the neighborhood barbershop. There are definitely much nicer places in town, but this place is very close, it's convenient, and the guy there doesn't need to speak to me at all. I like that. He recognizes that I'm a guy and I don't really care what my hair looks like. I will love whatever he does to my head. So I indicate that I'd like my hair shorter. I sit in the chair and then he cuts it and we're done. Once the rain stopped, I hopped on my scooter to get some gas. For some reason, I've started tipping the people who put gas in my scooter. I don't think that is commonly done in Thailand. Yet I did it one day because my change was exactly 20 baht, and I just did the usual keep it gesture when the young guy tried to hand me my change. He appeared to be very happy about that, and when he went back to the cluster of other gas pumpers, he waved the 20 baht note in the air happily and showed it off to the other pumpers. I guess I got a kick out of that reaction, so I've kept up the habit. It usually costs 100 baht to fill up the tank, and then I hand the pumper 20 baht. But the pumpers confused me yesterday. When I rode up to the gas station, I wasn't quite sure where to go, but a young woman indicated a spot where I should pull up, and I did so. She was filling another scooter's tank at the time, and she had to then go to the cash register with the money from that customer. But while she was gone, a young guy came over and filled up my tank. But then the young woman returned and took my money and went to get change. So I got all mixed up about who to tip. The guy had done the actual filling of the tank, but the girl had greeted me and organized my visit to their gas station and handled the payment. In the end, since the girl was dealing with the money and was standing right beside me, it was most convenient to hand her the tip. She put her hands together and bowed in a gesture of thanks, and then she started to walk away. But then I think she realized that the guy had actually done the work of filling my tank, so she turned around and was holding the money in her hand while she walked over to the guy. I never saw the end of the transaction, but maybe she gave the money to him. It's not a big deal, obviously. 20 baht is not much money. I was just interested in the social norms at play here. Some of my other small errand-type adventures centered on the local Mr. DIY hardware store. I went there because I wanted to pick up some wrapping paper. I had a birthday present organized for the young son of a friend of mine, and I wanted to get some wrapping paper. I remembered that Mr. DIY had a pretty extensive party decorations section containing such things, so I dropped by there. I couldn't find any wrapping paper, but I found some kind of construction or party paper that would serve, and I bought some of that. But on my way to the cash register, I passed by a wall containing small home appliances, and I spotted a travel kettle. The crazy thing is that I had just bought a brand new kettle in Gampang Pet for 200 baht. It's actually quite a nice household kettle, and it would normally cost something like 500 or 600 baht. It just happened to be on sale at a deep discount. And I thought it would be nice to have a kettle to make coffee in my room at these hotels. Even if I only used it for the week I was in Gampang Pet, it would be worth it. I ended up putting it in my backpack and taking it with me all the way back to Mae Sot. It's big and somewhat heavy, but it still fits into my backpack without any problems. And I planned to take it with me to Sukhothai as well. Had I seen an actual mini travel kettle in Gampang Pet, I would have bought one of those instead, but it wasn't available. So I bought the full-size one. But there at Mr. DIY was a smallish travel kettle for 209 baht. If I bought it, I would essentially have 3 kettles. I have my usual cooking pot, which I've been using for the last year and a half as my kettle and a cooker, and I have the big kitchen kettle from Gampang Pet. And if I bought the kettle at Mr. DIY, I would have the travel kettle. Not even I need 3 kettles, but I bought it anyway. I couldn't resist. I was actually pretty happy at the thought of my purchase as I walked back to the guest house with the kettle packed away inside my knapsack. I love a good mini travel gadget. They're just fun to have. And it's half the size and half the weight of the Gampang Pet kettle. It will be much more convenient to toss into my backpack and bring to Sukhothai, and maybe even on my trip to the north of Thailand. However, I ran into a problem when I took it out of the box. How could it be otherwise? It turns out that despite being half the size and half the weight of the big kettle, this travel kettle has a gigantic cord and plug. It's a 220 volt kettle, and the plug is huge. It has the much larger round pins with a ground pin on top of that. And that means it won't plug into my normal extension cord and power bar. Why does such a small kettle have a plug that size? I have no idea. And the cord itself is very short. So it's a certainty that 90% of the time, the cord won't reach from any kind of tabletop to an outlet. I didn't think that would be a problem because I have my extension cord and power bar. But this monster plug won't fit into my power bar. And I do have a big and fancy and expensive Scross World travel adapter, but would you believe it, the plug on this mini kettle won't fit into that either. The holes on the Scross are too small. In any event, my expensive Scross is broken too. I bought this Scross precisely because it has 2 USB charging ports on it, but neither of them work anymore. More and more, I'm of the opinion that buying expensive, high-quality gear like this Scross is a waste of money. Sure, it's better than the cheaper alternatives, but that's no advantage when it breaks anyway, and you have to keep replacing it. It seems to be better these days to just buy the cheap versions of everything. It's all going to break soon anyway. Anyway, I had purchased what I thought was a convenient travel kettle, but right out of the box, I wasn't able to plug it in, and none of my current plug adapters would fit. I didn't have much hope, but I decided to go back to Mr. DIY and see if they had a cheap adapter that would work. At first, I thought I had failed. Mr. DIY did have a big display of 2 very basic and very common travel adapters. I see these exact same adapters everywhere, and they cost about $1 each. I thought they would be exactly the same as the ones I already have, the expensive Scross and the equally expensive ones from premium brand Sea to Summit. My mini kettle plug wouldn't fit into any of those. And I wasn't able to test the ones at Mr. DIY because they were in a sealed package. But for 33 baht, I thought I might as well just take a chance. So I bought one. And to my amazement, it worked perfectly. At first, I thought the mini kettle plug wouldn't fit in it either, but I just had to push a bit harder and it clicked right into place. Not only that, but the equally massive plug on my Panasonic camera battery charger also fits into it. And that meant I could finally throw away this stupid Scross adapter. The only reason I was still carrying around this giant heavy adapter was it was the only way I could plug in the Panasonic battery charger. It has one of those equally ridiculous and huge 3-pin plugs from the UK, and my Scross was the only way to plug it in. But I discovered that this tiny $1 adapter from Mr. DIY works just as well. Today, I plan to go back to Mr. DIY and buy 2 more of those things. They're very handy. I need one for my mini kettle, one for my regular cooking pot, and one for my Panasonic battery charger. You'd think at this point in my life I'd be done with adapters. I've purchased so many adapters in my lifetime, you'd think I'd never have to buy another one. But the quest for suitable adapters never seems to end. It's a lifelong challenge. I think that when and if I hop on my scooter for a longer trip through the north of Thailand, I will bring both the cooking pot and the travel kettle with me. The cooking pot can also serve as a kettle, so technically I don't need both, but the mini kettle is quite small and light, and it might add a lot of convenience. I'll give it a try anyway. I don't imagine the travel kettle will last a lifetime. It's not a heavy-duty appliance. I can already sense that the switch could be fragile and will break, but I will use it as long as it lasts. And if that isn't enough trivia about cooking pots and kettles, there is even more. As I thought about packing up my cooking pot and taking it with me, I wondered if I could just leave the glass lid behind. I don't actually need the lid for cooking. The only time I use it is for straining the water from noodles. I put the lid on, leaving a crack for the water to drain out, and I tilt the pot while holding the lid tightly in place. It's a delicate operation and invites disaster. I've never actually had a disaster, but the possibility is there. The lid is not a pasta strainer after all, and the glass lid adds 25% of the weight of the whole cooking pot. So I wondered if I could rig up an alternative pasta strainer and leave this lid behind. I tested this theory the other day, and I tried to drain the pasta using my normal eating bowl. It fits over the opening of the pot quite nicely, but it is very hard to hold on to, and the hot steam leaking out of the edges blows directly onto my fingers and burns badly. That is definitely a disaster waiting to happen. I was thinking about all this while I was wandering through Mr. DIY, and I happened upon a display of actual plastic pasta strainers, big, brightly colored ones. And in a fit of insanity, I bought one. It hardly cost anything, so the money isn't the insane part. What's insane is that it is quite large and quite green and is a weird thing to make room for in your backpack. But I already love it. I used it once last night. I made some pasta, and it was so much easier to just strain the pasta in this thing rather than my usual approach of inviting disaster by using the glass lid. And that raises the question of why I didn't buy one a year and a half ago. I could have been using one all this time and been much happier for it. But that's the kind of thing that happens in my life. In any event, I now have a series of cascading choices to make for my possible scooter trip to the north. Should I bring the cooking pot? Should I bring the cooking pot and the travel kettle? And if I bring the cooking pot, should I bring the glass lid or the plastic pasta strainer? Or both? Decisions, decisions. And then came doing the laundry. That took a while. And then came editing videos for YouTube. That took up most of the day, in fact. All this other stuff happened as quick errands jammed in between editing sessions. Most of the day was spent on videos. And then came a bunch of time spent trying to organize all my memory cards and charging all my camera batteries and otherwise getting ready for going to Sukhothai today. Things got a bit nutty in there because I was so tired by this point in the day. My efforts extended long into the evening, and I couldn't even keep track of what I was doing or why. And the end result of all that is that I need today to recover from my efforts of yesterday. And assuming I do go to Sukhothai, I will be going tomorrow. I should also note that I spent a lot of time yesterday reading about Sukhothai and the history of Thailand. I learned a lot. However, a big stumbling block in terms of remembering this stuff and keeping track of it is simple pronunciation. I keep reading the names of all these famous kings and the leaders in the history of Thailand, and all I see is a bunch of letters that make no sense at all in the way they are put together. I can make nothing of the sounds they are supposed to represent. My brain just sees these incomprehensible words and names and skips over them. There is no hope of ever being able to remember them, let alone say them. Wednesday, November 10th, 2021, 5:11 a.m., Green Guest House, Mae Sot, Thailand. It's 5 in the morning, and I feel pretty good. A bit tired, but not excessively so. And as I look around my room, I can sense that I am about 65% packed already. All the signs are positive that I will be on the road to Sukhothai today. With an early start, I could ride straight to Sukhothai. The Sukhothai Historical Park is only 154 kilometers away by the main highway. But I'm in the mood to go slow, as I always am. I think I will ride to Tak City today and spend the night at the fabulously named Dome Thong Residence Hotel. I think of a night like that as a sort of a launch pad for the Sukhothai experience itself. Right now, my brain is preoccupied with the logistics of simply leaving Mae Sot for this trip. I have been reading about Sukhothai a lot, but my brain is still stuck in Mae Sot mode. It can't really contemplate Sukhothai with pleasure. But once I'm on the road, my mood will shift. And while I ride to Tak and during the night in Tak, I will be able to think only about Sukhothai. I need that night of anticipation to truly appreciate and enjoy a trip like this. If I leave for Sukhothai today directly, I will end up thinking about just logistics. When will I arrive? Will it rain during the trip? Where will I spend the night when I get there? What will I eat? Basically, I will be distracted. But during a night in Tak City, I will be able to contemplate the pleasures of this little expedition. I will be able to focus on it without all the distractions of being in Mae Sot. I haven't decided yet if I will take Highway 12 to go to Tak City or if I will take the longer mountain route via Mae Ramat. Both are actually very interesting and beautiful rides. It's not automatic that the small road through the mountains is the better choice. I'm actually leaning towards taking Highway 12. I don't want to complicate my life today. And Highway 12 takes me past the Chao Por Powo Shrine, the scenic lookout point, the traditional Musser Market, and the new Musser Market where the nice coffee shop is located. I'll spend a few minutes on Google Maps this morning to scan the region for any other interesting places to break up the trip. It hardly seems possible, but yesterday's errands were also largely shopping errands. I spend most of the time working on videos and things like that, but I woke up with a mission, and that was to buy a sleeping sheet. I always travel with my own bed sheet. In the past, this sheet has been one of those cocoon-like affairs, a cotton liner that goes inside a sleeping bag. I use it as a sleeping bag liner, but then I just use it as a regular sleeping sheet as well. I've bought pre-made ones from companies like Sea to Summit, but I've also sewn my own. However, my last one wore out. The material got so thin and weak that it was not much stronger than tissue paper, and when I turned over in bed, I would end up tearing the sheet in half like the Hulk ripping off his t-shirt. I tried sewing it back together, but it was hopeless. The sheet just tore apart in new places, so I eventually threw it away. The issue here, and there is always an issue when it comes to my life, is that in Asia, most people don't use flat bed sheets. Hotels don't use them either. There will be a fitted sheet over the mattress, and then there will be a duvet, and that's it. In the cheap hotels where I stayed most of the time in the past, you wouldn't really call these things duvets. They were just small rectangular sections of nylon. They feel nasty against your skin, and they are tiny. They are of no use to me as a covering while sleeping. If I wanted to endure that nylon against my skin, I could cover my chest or my lower legs. I had to choose one or the other. These things are so small that they won't cover both my upper body and my lower body. And that's why I always have to have my own bed sheet with me. Hotels don't supply them. But what I think of as a normal flat bed sheet is nearly impossible to find here. They aren't considered normal at all. In all my time in Mae I've never seen one for sale. And yesterday, knowing that I was going to Sukhothai for a week and would be staying in hotels, I went out once again to see about buying a bedsheet. I went first to Mega Home. Oddly enough, despite my interest in places like that, I had never been to the Mega Home in Mae I passed it many dozens of times, but I never had a reason to go in. But I already knew that Tesco didn't sell flat bed sheets. They carried only the standard set of a fitted sheet and 2 pillowcases. Every single store sells only that. And trust me, I've looked. But I had never looked at Mega Home. I rode my scooter there without much hope, but I thought I should check the place out. And it turns out that despite having an extensive section of the store dedicated to bedding, there was not a single flat bed sheet anywhere. All they sold were sets containing fitted sheets. All was not lost on that trip, however. I was fascinated by Mega Home. That place is massive. I treated it as a tourist attraction and simply wandered up and down the aisles in a daze, pondering the fact that our modern lives required every single item for sale in that gigantic place. As I walked around, I played out in my head a hypothetical conversation with someone from a couple thousand years ago, and I'd have to patiently explain to this person that, yes, in the modern world, all of these items had a purpose and a use, and most were essential to normal life. This would totally befuddle a person from the past. I don't imagine they could even get their heads around the concept that a normal person, and not an emperor, would require so many things. And in keeping with that theme, I bought a couple more adapters that I found. These adapters were nicer than the one I got at Mr. DIY, and they had 2 outlets, not just one. I already love these adapters. After Megahome, I returned to Tesco just to check to make sure that they also had no regular bed sheets. And they didn't. Then I went to a couple other places that sold bedroom furniture, but their limited supply of bedding also consisted of just the fitted sheets. I was just starting to think that once again I would have to start adapting. I kind of figured from the beginning that I would have to do this anyway. There were times in the past when I'd used a fitted sheet as a regular sheet. I just jammed my feet into the elasticized corners and then pulled the other elasticized corner up to my shoulders. It worked in a way. The problem was that they weren't really long enough. I thought perhaps I could buy 2 of them, cut off the elasticized corners, and then sew the 2 parts together in some fashion to make a big flat sheet. Maybe I could get a duvet cover and cut that open and sew it back together. Something. But before I did that, I found myself back at the guest house, and I sent a friend of mine a message to tell him this story, which I thought was kind of an amusing story. And he wrote back to suggest one other place in Maysot that I didn't know about. This friend used to run a resort, and he said they got all their bedding from this place, and if anyone had a flat sheet, they would have it. I rode my scooter to this place and found that it was a kind of wholesale operation. And it was very busy, with trucks and vans loading up with tons of bedding and other bedroom furniture going out for delivery. But they also had a small attached store that was open to the public. And in there, 99% of the items on display were exactly what I've been talking about. Simple sets of a fitted sheet, 2 pillowcases, and what they called a bolster cover. But on the packaging there was a list in English, and on this list the option fitted sheet had been checked to indicate the contents. But at the top of this list, always unchecked, was the option flat sheet. This was the first time I'd even seen the words flat sheet used in Thailand. So that was promising. I took one of these packages up to the woman at the desk and I showed her the listing for flat sheets. And she rummaged around in a back area for a while, and to my delight, she emerged with a couple of flat sheets. They didn't really stock them on their shelves, I guess, but over the years, they'd gotten a couple here and there and just tossed them into the warehouse and left them there. And there they stayed, gathering dust until the day I came in and bought one. The jury is still out on whether I like this sheet or not. I'm not even sure I know what it is made of. There is no listing anywhere to indicate what it is made of. It's certainly not 100% cotton, which is what I would prefer. It feels a bit thin and scratchy, and not exactly warm and soft. But for now, it is the best I can do. It's also pretty wide, quite a bit wider than technically I need, but I can always cut it up and hem the edges. Or I can just fold it in half and double the thickness and make it warmer that way. We shall see. And I think I will stop babbling here because I'm eager to do my final bit of packing and get on the road. If I have more trivia from my life to note, I can do that in Tax City when I get there. Time to get busy here. Thursday, November 11th, 2021, 4 a.m., room 102, Dome Thong Residence Hotel, Tak City, Thailand. As has become frequent, I can feel that I have no business being awake this early. I'm not fully rested and ready to face the day yet. But I couldn't sleep. The night feels like it has gone on for a very long time. I shall sit here typing away for a while and see how things go. Maybe I can then go back to sleep for an hour or two. Yesterday ended up being what felt like a very busy day. It was a good day. No question about that. But the day ended up being its own thing, its own small adventure, separate from going to Sukhothai. In my head, I had set it aside as a day for easing into my Sukhothai experience. But that never had a chance to happen. I was too busy living the day I was in to worry about the next days to come. It started with the packing. That required a lot more energy and a lot more thought than I expected. I thought I was ready, almost fully packed, but it turns out that I wasn't. And I had to do a lot of last-minute fidgeting and making sure that I had things organized and had packed everything I would need. And even then, I made a gigantic mistake. In fact, it was the worst mistake I've ever made in terms of cameras. I still can't believe it. In fact, I almost made 3 big mistakes, and it was all through carelessness. The big mistake I made is that I neglected to charge up the batteries for the GoPro. I still have no idea how that happened. I have a very clear system for that. Part of the system is that when batteries are fully charged and ready to go, I put them into these special pouches. An orange battery and memory card pouch for the Hero 9, and a blue battery and memory card pouch for the Hero 7. I've done that for years, going all the way back to when I bought my first Hero 7. Charged batteries always go into the colored battery bag. I just know that if a battery is inside one of those bags, then it is charged. If it is not inside that bag, no matter where it is depleted and must be charged up. Yet, yesterday, the 2 Hero 9 batteries inside the orange battery bag were dead, or nearly dead, and I have no idea how that happened. How did I put the batteries inside the orange battery bag even though I hadn't charged them up? I don't know. The whole situation was reminiscent of the chaos and confusion of my arrival in Tak City last time. I ended up arriving in Tak completely flustered and stressed out because, just at the last minute, I ran out of battery power. And I went through over an hour of just sitting at the side of the road and fiddling with cameras, trying to fight through a bunch of issues that cropped up. And it was unnecessary. All I needed was one more charged battery for the Hero 9, and I would have been fine. But I didn't have one, and I wasn't ready for that much fighting with camera gear. And yesterday, the whole morning led up to a key moment when I rode my scooter into a fascinating Mooser village far off the main highway. For many reasons, this was an important moment. It was the key moment of the whole day. It was the highlight, and I was feeling a bit self-conscious and worried. I wasn't sure of myself as I rode my scooter into this village. Clearly, I didn't belong there. Clearly, I was a tourist. I was a giant white dude on a scooter in a village that probably never gets outside visitors. And I was doing this in the middle of a worldwide pandemic. So I wasn't sure of my welcome. I kind of needed this to go smoothly. I was struggling with this sense that people were looking at me with suspicion and dislike. And right at that moment, the battery in my Hero 9 died. It was the worst timing ever. Instead of entering this village quietly and easily without any drama, I had to pull over on the narrow street with village houses on all sides, and I had to open up my knapsack and get out my GoPro bag and unzip it and get the battery bag and unzip that. Even worse, I had the Hero 9 inside the media mod, which meant that changing the battery was a long and complicated process. I really hate that aspect of the media mod. I finally got all this done, and I packed up all my stuff and put it away and remounted the GoPro on the scooter. And luckily, the local dogs hadn't pounced on me yet. I had been worried all this time that the dogs would notice me, a stranger in their village, and a dozen of them would surround me and bark at me and make my arrival even more of a drama. But that hadn't happened, and I was grateful for that. But then, when I turned on the GoPro, the battery level read 11%. And I didn't even get 11% out of it. The GoPro simply shut down before I started up my scooter. I had no choice but to get off the scooter and do everything all over again and put in the next battery. This time I checked the battery before I put the whole system back together, and this one read 33% or something like that. I thought I would be able to nurse some time out of that battery, and I thought I did. But when I got here to Tac City and started going through the video of the day, the video from that village was just gone. I have no idea what happened. I do have some video on the main road I followed after I left that village, but none of the video I shot inside the village ended up on the memory card. Was it my mistake? Did I forget to hit the record button? Was it the GoPro's fault? I don't know. But I did manage to nurse that last battery along the countryside road until I got to the main village of Ban Hoa Pla Lot. But I felt rushed because I was aware of that battery about to die at any minute. And just as I was at the main temple of this village, the last battery died. And that was it for the Hero 9 for the day. I had basically started the day with one fully charged battery, and that's it. Such a rookie mistake, such a dumb mistake. I still have no idea how that happened. It feels like all I do 24 hours a day is charge batteries. How it happened that I set off on this trip with dead batteries is a mystery. And then, because it can go no other way, I had issues with my other cameras. I got out the Hero 7 first, and I spent what felt like a long time at the temple getting it ready and set up with the Rode Wireless Go microphone. But I'd forgotten that the Hero 7 no longer works with the Rode, and I don't know why. Some months back it just stopped working, and I've never been able to figure out why. I thought it was because the cord on my GoPro mic adapter had broken, but I have a brand new mic adapter, and the same thing happens when I plug in the Rode. I filmed a bunch of stuff at the temple, but when I stopped to review it, I realized that the audio wasn't working. I had done a quick audio test at the very beginning, as I always do, and it had seemed fine, but once I started filming longer sequences, the audio shut down. There was just static and hiss and long audio dropouts. Luckily, I could turn to my new DJI Pocket 2 and use that. I was grateful to have it in my knapsack and ready to go. Its battery, at least, was fully charged. But all this camera hassle, stopping to put away the Hero 7 and get the Pocket 2 set up and ready, was so stressful and frustrating. And it was even more stressful because this temple just happened to be a kind of dog shelter. I couldn't tell you how many dogs there were, 20, 25, more, but I can tell you that these were big dogs. I was told by another visitor to the temple that the head monk of this temple just happened to be very artistic and loved dogs. And that's why this temple was so ornate, and also why there were so many dogs. But I can add to that story. Based on the nature of the canines constantly barking at me, this head monk didn't just like dogs, he liked big dogs. The bigger the better. He didn't mess around with the little yappers and ankle biters. He liked huskies and other really big breeds. And these dogs never quite got accustomed to my presence. They treated me like an intruder and a deadly threat during my entire visit. And I had dogs barking at me and rushing at me and surrounding me during my entire visit. Dog places like that always puzzle me. I remember staying at a hotel in Indonesia that also served as a kind of dog rescue. And even though I was a guest at the hotel, it was very difficult for me to even leave my room. The dogs attacked every time they saw me. And this clearly had been going on for years. At what point, as a hotel owner, do you finally realize that having a bunch of dogs that attack your guests at every opportunity is not a great idea? Based on many places I've been over the years, the answer is never. And this temple was the same. And it's not like the monks weren't aware of the problem. Every time I took a step, the dogs would bark at me and the monks would come out and shoo them away and chastise them and drive them off. I'd stand still and make friends with the dogs. I'm nothing if not the dog whisperer. I love dogs and I'm comfortable around them, and they can sense that, and they eventually calm down and I pet them. But a few minutes later, I'd turn the corner at a new part of the temple, and the same dogs would see me as a new threat, and they'd start barking again. A couple of them would rush at me as if they were about to attack. They couldn't help it, and the monks would rush to my defense again. And if this happens with every visitor to the temple, a temple that depends on donated money from the community around it, then you'd think at some point this policy of having 25 large and somewhat aggressive dogs on your premises would start to be questioned. The issue would at least come up at the next meeting. But apparently at this temple, it never did. And I really see it being a problem. I love dogs, and I don't mind the challenge of befriending an aggressive dog, but even I was uncomfortable at this temple. Lots of people are afraid of dogs, and they wouldn't last 2 seconds there. They'd probably never get out of their car or off their motorcycle if they came for a visit. The story of how I ended up at the Hue Plalat temple with all the dogs is an interesting one, and it begins with the planning of my entire day's small adventures. I decided to take the main highway to Tak instead of the smaller mountain road. And with that decision came the decision to stop at the Chowpor Pawo shrine to light more firecrackers, to stop at the Doi Musser market for good coffee, and finally to look for any interesting new detours I could take. And I found such a detour in a small road leading from the Musser market to a village called Ban Hue Plalot, nestled deep in the hills. The village and the road and the setting on their own would have been enough, but this village also appeared to have a quite ornate and interesting temple. That settled the matter, and I decided that after my coffee at the Musser market, I would visit this Musser village. My stop at the Chowpor Pawo shrine was quite entertaining, by the way. I was there very early in the morning, since it is just a few kilometers outside of Mesot. But luckily, the little shop that sells firecrackers was open, and I bought a small box of 100. I didn't feel the need to go crazy and buy 500 or 1,000 or more. And I had this idea to film the firecrackers from below. I was going to put my GoPro on the ground directly beneath the string of firecrackers. At the last minute, I wisely decided it wasn't a good idea to risk my precious Hero 9 in this way, and I broke out the Hero 7 to do this. I filmed the experience itself with the Hero 9 as usual, but I put the Hero 7 on the ground directly underneath the firecrackers and pointed straight up at them. I had to sit down at a table first and spend some time getting both cameras ready to go. I'm still struggling with a lack of memory cards in my life, so that was a process. But I got something figured out, and then I went to the back area where it was safe to light the firecrackers. And then I did something dumb. I had the Hero 9 rolling, and I was talking to the camera and explaining what I was doing as I unboxed the firecrackers. But, like a dummy, I tried to hold up the string of firecrackers by the fuse at the bottom, and the fuse pulled right out. I was now standing there holding a string of explosives in one hand and the fuse in the other. It was clearly a scene out of 1,000 movies and TV shows, as the hero has to figure out how to safely light the explosives without a fuse. For me, being very inexperienced, the wisest course of action would have been to simply buy another box. Why risk blowing off my fingers for $1's worth of firecrackers? And on my own, perhaps that is what I would have done. But with the GoPro running, I thought I'd take a chance. The story needed an ending. Questions needed to be answered for the video. What happens when the fuse comes out of your firecrackers? Can you just stick it back in? Then will the fuse just fizzle out and do nothing? Or is it now too short? Will it set off the firecrackers way too early and blow off a finger? I was going to find out. It wasn't totally obvious how to reinsert the fuse. I hadn't taken a close look before to see how it was attached. I guess I had assumed the fuse was physically tied to the individual fuses of the firecrackers themselves, and that's why I had tried to dangle the string from the fuse. But it pulled out so easily that it was clear that it wasn't physically tied to anything. The manufacturers had simply stuck the fuse into the end somehow, and it was just held in place by friction or perhaps a bit of glue. I saw what looked like a kind of tube that the fuse might have come out of, but if so, I wasn't able to put it back in. In the end, all I could do was jam the fuse into the end and hope for the best. The problem was that for it to stay in place, I had to stick it in quite far, and that meant a much shorter piece of fuse was available to light. And that meant there was a risk that the string would go off much sooner, perhaps while I was still too close. I decided to risk it anyway, and I set up the cameras as best I could. Then I lit the fuse and backed away fast. I did manage to get to what I thought was a safe distance, but the initial force of the first firecrackers going off again took me by surprise, and I jumped back a couple more feet. I can't be completely sure, but it did look like the firecrackers went off in a different sequence this time, and it could have been because of the new fuse placement. But no damage was done, except that the Hero 7 on the ground was covered in red and black dust. It got really dirty, and I was glad I hadn't subjected my Hero 9 to that onslaught of noise, force, and dirt. GoPros are designed to take punishment, and I see people on YouTube treating them very roughly. But these people also routinely break their GoPros and then just replace them. But I don't have bank accounts filled with $500 chunks of cash that I can use to buy a new Hero 9 every time I break one. I need this Hero 9 to last as long as possible. I don't think I would ever even risk taking it underwater. I'd use the Hero 7 for that. I don't trust the waterproofing enough to go swimming with the Hero 9. I didn't make any other stops between the shrine and the Mooser Market coffee shop. I just hopped on the scooter and rode straight there. I was so happy to see that it was open. The early morning air was surprisingly cold, and I was chilled to the bone by the time I arrived at the market. The thought of a hot cup of coffee was a welcome one. I realized that I'd probably need to pick up a jacket before I head to the north on my scooter trip. My hot latte at the coffee shop was just as good as the first one I'd had there. It wasn't quite as hot, but the strong coffee flavor was there, and it was just hot enough. But best of all, the woman who made and served my coffee spoke enough English for us to have a conversation. And I was in such a good mood and so full of energy that I chatted with her like a nutty bunny. I was very curious about the coffee that they sold, and I was astonished to learn that her family grew and processed this coffee themselves. So it was true that there were coffee plantations up here in the hills. I had a feeling there had to be, but I had never seen a coffee farm anywhere. And I had seen no evidence of coffee beans being harvested, dried, roasted, or transported at all. And it turned out that the tea they served was not made from traditional tea leaves. It was a special brew that they made from roasted coffee fruit, the husk that is around the fruit of the actual coffee bean. I never would have learned any of this if she didn't speak English. And then after we talked about the coffee for a while, I asked her if she could teach me how to say the name of this village, Ban Hue Plalot. And she told me that that was her village, that was her home. I thought that was a great omen for my plans to go there, and soon after I turned the wheel of my scooter down the access road, which led for about 15 kilometers through some nice scenery. I had those issues with my GoPro batteries and a bit of a problem with the dogs at the temple, but I quite enjoyed that side trip to the village. It was clearly a Mussar village with a completely different atmosphere and appearance compared to a regular Thai village. While I was at the village, I got a notification about a message on WhatsApp, but I was unable to read it. I guess my connection to the internet wasn't strong enough. When I left the village and rode back to the highway, the connection got stronger and I was able to check. And the message was from a mystery benefactor. He had seen my morning posts on social media about my trip to Sukhothai, and he had booked 4 nights at a nice hotel in the old city for me. The hotel is called the Orchid Hibiscus, and it is located just on the outside of the old city walls, basically right in the heart of the city and near everything. It also looks like a very nice place. It even has a swimming pool on the grounds. It remains to be seen whether I actually take a plunge in the pool. I should, of course, but it's not an automatic thing for me. Swimming pools are a bit like bathtubs and saunas for me. I understand their appeal, but I quickly get bored while inside them. Even going for a swim in the pool would feel like I was tearing myself away from other things I would enjoy doing more, even if that thing was just typing in my journal. The rest of the day consisted of a fairly straight shot down Highway 12 to Tac City, where I checked into room 102 at the Dome Thong Residence Hotel. The same friendly women were staffing the small office, and checking in was as simple as handing over 400 baht and getting the key. The only formality was their need to take a photocopy of my passport's information page. The room was nearly identical to room 202 from my previous visit. I had hoped to get a lot of things done in the world of social media with the remaining time of the day, but I was too tired. I had woken up quite early in the morning and I had expended a lot of energy during the day. I couldn't relax enough or think clearly enough to settle into any kind of productive routine. It had been a good day though, and I look back on all the experiences I'd had with pleasure.